Perfect. Thank you for that, Malcolm. Yes. So, welcome everyone to my talk about hedgerows, and it does say hedgerows and hair streaks, but as Malcolm pointed out yesterday, it's not just about hair streak kinds of butterfly species that use hedgerows. So I'm really excited to talk to you about it. And yeah, I'm going to start a little bit more about hedgerows generally, hedgerow management, and then I'll talk a little bit about the project at the end, and potentially how you can get involved in that as well, and our kind of ambitions for trying to help Hertfordshire specifically, their hedgerows. But yeah, thank you very much. So a little bit about me. I obviously have a passion for all things hedgerows, and I love hedgerows, and for so many reasons that we'll go through in this presentation. I graduated from the University of Nottingham with environmental biology. So did a lot of that, ecology, agriculture, and science. I've always had a passion for nature and always had a passion for the countryside and getting outdoors. So I've been very lucky to study that and have that as my career. I actually did my dissertation as a management plan in the university's hedgerows, so I've slightly had hedgerows written in my stars. So yeah, it's really good to be doing a job now with it as well. I worked as a farm environment advisor in Gloucestershire with FWAG, Farming and Wildlife Advisory Group, who I'm now luckily working in Hertfordshire with as well. And I was actually lucky enough to be involved in a project about chalk-hill blue. So I was a site called Stinchcombe Hill, which is in South Cotswolds, and I yeah, helped reinstitute grazing to the triple SI grasslands, which was specifically for chalk-hill blue, but also species like brown Argus as well. So yeah, I've had a little bit of experience with BC and with butterflies generally before. So yeah, so it's and then recently sort of made the move over to I live in northwest London, so I live in Middlesex, in Hendon. And yeah, so I moved about a year ago. Initially worked at Robinson Research on a harvest placement over the summer, cutting some of their long-term trials, and then yeah, now work for CPRE as a hedgerow hero officer since about October. So yeah, so fairly new still to the area, but yeah, I feel like I've kind of bedded in quite a lot in a short space of time. So yeah, so starting off initially, I guess at quite a basic point, but what is a hedgerow? So a hedgerow is legally defined as by DEFRA and Natural England. So it's defined as a boundary line of trees or shrubs that is over 20 meters long and less than 5 meters wide. And that also includes everything within 2 meters of the center. So that's both trees, but also vegetation as well. So it's interesting because I think people often see a hedge as a structure, a physical structure, but in fact the hedge is the whole area around it. So it is a whole ecosystem in itself. It's not just a line of trees. It's much more complex than that. But yeah, this is a hedgerow. Anything kind of more than that is a line of trees. Anything less than that is kind of a scrubby boundary, really. So a hedgerow is its own specific thing. Types of hedgerows, so a little bit about kind of what they mean. So generally, hedges are either ancient or enclosure. You'll notice it doesn't add up to 100. That's because there's kind of 10% margin of error, kind of. So it's genuinely skewed towards enclosure hedges, but yeah, it's not completely accurate. Um, so yeah, so ancient hedgerows are generally they can be thousands of years old. There's a lot of legends. A lot of these are cut from the ancient wildwood that used to cover Britain, but it's unfortunately probably not true. But a lot of hedgerows, that is the reason why they exist, was because they are bits of woodland that have remained after fields and enclosures and settlements have expanded. So in ancient hedgerows, you'll often find things like hazel, maple, ash, blackthorn. In different areas of the country, you'll also find different species. So, for example, holly hedges are very common in Staffordshire, where they have a lot of livestock, so to keep bulls in, and willow in Somerset, which is obviously very wet, especially at the moment. So yeah, you could get some regional distinctness. Mostly ancient hedgerows can be found in the West Country, but also in the southeast as well. So we have quite a bit of ancient hedgerows in Hertfordshire, especially South and East Hertfordshire. But having lived in living in Hendon, I have noticed there's actually quite a lot of ancient hedgerows in parks and around the place as well. You can see this stuff. I went on a walk in Harrow the other day, and there's an alley in an area which is known as an ancient kind of corridor and an ancient boundary, and so there's likely to have been a hedgerow there for thousands of years. So you can find this stuff anywhere. You often find ancient hedgerows on banks as well, where they've built up material over time, or where the pathway that they're next to has sunken over the years and years and years and formed a bank. Enclosure hedges are a bit different. So these were mainly planted these were, hedges weren't really planted before the 17th to 19th centuries. They were cut out from woodland. So this is when we started enclosing common land, which was managed by a group of people rather than individuals. And these were enclosed over time through Acts of Parliament, and so they were planted with hawthorn hedges because they were very quick growing and grew very densely. So that's what a lot of the Midlands looks like, is those. And you find them, yeah, through the Midlands and down through Wiltshire, and it's most common in Hertfordshire and in North Herts as well. And yeah, so a species-rich hedgerow contains five or more native species on average in a 30-meter length. So that's, I guess, and species-rich and ancient are generally kind of interchangeable because unless you do find it the hedges that we're planting, Mark and I were just talking about it, we've got about 14 different species, so it's not a hard and fast rule, because we are planting, but generally hedges were never really planted with many species to begin with. They've accrued them over time. So yeah, so this gives you a bit of an idea about the kind of different countryside types. So you'll see here where the black circle is, that is Herts and Middlesex. So we are split between ancient countryside and planned countryside. So where that's more enclosed as well. So we're kind of between two areas, which is really interesting. It's why you get quite different assemblages of species, especially butterflies. So yeah, so it's a really interesting one. So what happened to hedgerows? So why do we want to help them? So through enclosure, and a lots of workers and people going into kind of working factories in the city. Hedges were no longer managed, so they're no longer seen as beneficial, and that kind of relationship to them was lost. And then with mechanization of agriculture later on, with bigger combines and bigger fields needed to grow more food, hedges were progressively grubbed out in the 20th century. So 30% of hedges were lost since 1945. Chemicals as well. I'm sure you'll kind of be aware of that with butterflies and invertebrates, but agrochemicals affect all things in the countryside, and have damaged a lot of hedgerows and killed off a lot of them over time. So what about Hertfordshire hedgerows? So what's this is yeah, this is a bit of a Hertfordshire slant, but a lot of this is applicable to Middlesex. And I definitely it's really interesting. I've noticed in my park where I live, and often you'll find it in urban parks where there's a line of trees in the middle of a field, not next to a path, and or a bit of scrub, a bit of bramble. And you kind of think, why is that there? Why were just these random line of trees planted in the middle of the green? And a lot of the time it's because that was where a hedgerow was. So there's some really good examples, and you can find them anywhere, and they would have just grown up over time, whereas they were stopped being managed, or they were the standard trees within a hedgerow. So yeah, so a lot of this is still applicable to Middlesex. So a lot of this area was traditionally managed for fuel due to the area's lack of coal. So up north, you had a lot of coal throughout history. So they were coppiced. So they were effectively that brashing material was taken away and turned into charcoal. And it's really interesting as well. So we've got some kind of testimonies from the 18th century talking about how a lot of the hedgerows in Hertfordshire were 30 or 40 feet wide, giving the fields the air of being reclaimed from a general tract of woodland, which is really interesting. And if you remember what I just said in the last few slides, that is what a lot of hedgerows actually are. They are bits of woodland that have been reclaimed and have been pushed at and pushed around. And it's a good kind of metaphor for what's happened to nature in this country. Is it's been slowly made smaller and smaller and smaller until we get this, what we have now, which is a hedgerow, which is effectively a woodland that has been squeezed to be very narrow, which is actually their massive benefit. So it's why these things are very complicated. And so yeah, so I want that to be something you take throughout this is that is what a hedgerow is a very thin woodland. It's a woodland edge, so that's why they're so beneficial for wildlife, really. Yeah, so again, within Hertfordshire specifically, there's a difference between hedges, and hedgerows. So a hedge is defined as what you would think of as a hedge. So that's that definition in the first slide. And a hedgerow is much wider and broader, almost like a mini woodland that has in between two fields. So there's a bit of a regional distinction. This is a Hertfordshire specific thing. In Sussex, they call them shaws, where SHAW, where yeah, it's bigger than we usually think a hedgerow would be, basically, and it's usually multiple stems. Um, in East and West Hertfordshire, you generally get species rich, which I mentioned at the beginning. You get some in the south too, but only where chalk is exposed, and because of the clay, it's lots of blackthorn, which you also see in Middlesex as well. So you see a lot of blackthorn hedges because of that London clay, which is brilliant for things like brown hairstreaks. And North Hertfordshire is typically hawthorn, because these areas were enclosed in the 18th century. So yeah, so they were historically a lot more open. Hedgerow trees. So you often find within a hedgerow, you'll find standard trees. These were particularly managed for timber and for fuel. You'll see in that diagram on the right, which is a really interesting display of kind of how different trees are managed. So the one on the left is being grown for timber, so it's grown up really straight and tall because that's what you want for timber. Whereas on the right, that has historically managed for coppice, so it's been or for pollarding, sorry. So it's been continuously kind of pollarded and had that top haircut almost to take off that new growth that's then turned into charcoal and then repeated and repeated and repeated over time. So these were really, really significant parts of the landscape, and there's a lot of these were included in kind of tenancy agreements that you had to maintain and look after the pollard trees because they were so important. And yeah, you can see that really well in this on that one on the right, where it's grown up, it's bifurcated, it's a lot thicker, the trunk is a lot denser, and that canopy is really broad and really wide, because it's had that all that new growth, and it's obviously stopped being managed as that now, but it would have been in the past. So yeah, next time you're kind of walking the countryside, it's yeah interesting to spot the difference between the two, and see yeah why that hedgerow tree is there. Um, Typically oak, generally across Hertfordshire, for timber, but ash is also common for timber, and elm as well in the south of the county, or would have been, before Dutch elm disease. This trend is then reversed for pollard trees. So elm would have been by far and away the most pollarded trees, but also ash would have been very common, and oak less so. But you would have this is an oak here, but yeah, generally it was elm, for pollarding. And you'll be interested to know South Hertfordshire and Middlesex generally has, or South Hertfordshire specifically, has the most farmland trees out of Hertfordshire generally. So they've got a lot of those because it was managed a lot for fuel. So you find a lot of them there. So yeah, so how are hedgerows managed? So this is the next kind of part. So we talked a little bit about the history of hedgerows and the context of hedgerows in Herts and Middlesex, but how would these be managed? So I spoke about pollarding. Hedge laying is a very similar thing. So it's about rejuvenating the hedge and removing away a lot of the old growth and taking that away and allowing it to regrow again. So it can continue the life of a hedgerow in perpetuity, effectively. So we're still laying a lot of hedgerows that have been laid dozens of times before. So this is a really this extends their lifespan massively. Um, so yeah, so the generally kind of way of describing it is you partially cut through each main stem. So first you have to pull out all the brash, and you lay it down at an angle of 30 degrees. So you kind of do a pleature, it's called. I'll go through this a little bit more on the next one. And the stems and stuff then re-sprout. So as long as you're not disconnecting that main stem, it's still alive and it will still sprout and regrow. And then also they'll grow up from the stump as well. So it will become really, really dense and thick. So it's how you keep it dense. And that would have been traditionally done for keeping livestock in. But it's also, as we'll find out, very beneficial for wildlife. Um, and there's also many different styles as well. So you'll find across the country, most counties and most areas will have their own hedge laying style. Where we are, this is more of a kind of south of England style, which is what you see on that illustration on the right, where it's have stakes within the middle of the hedge, and then there's top binding on top as well. So it's all kind of it's to keep it strong, basically. And yeah, you find loads of others. There's Midland style as well, which is similar, but you kind of do the stakes and binders a bit different, and they're laid differently. There's kind of Welsh border hedges, Derbyshire bullock hedges, all sorts. There's loads of different hedges in across the county, and they're all really interesting to kind of work out. I actually this morning was all day actually down laying hedges in the south of England style in Hampshire, which was really interesting. So yeah, so this is a good illustration of what that looks like. So yeah, those are some. This is Robin, the magical hedge laying dog, um, but unfortunately she doesn't have opposable thumbs, so she struggles a bit wielding bill hook. So I do it for her. But yeah, so that's what a pleacher looks like. It's essentially where we put the bill hook in, or more common now, a chainsaw, and cut it down at 30-degree angle. So you'll see it's still attached. Interesting as well, within Hertfordshire, the dialect term for it is a plash. So rather than calling it pleaching, you call it plashing, which is interesting. And that's a good demonstration in that picture as well, of kind of how that would have been done with hand tools in the olden days, which is what I was doing today. But more often, yeah, you'll find it done with chainsaws and with machinery. This is from a really good book called the Hertfordshire, the a general view of the agriculture of the county of Hertfordshire, written in 1804 by Arthur Young, who was a kind of gentleman farmer who went around and looked at other people's farms, which sounds like a pretty dream job, and wrote about it and wrote lots of books about it. And this is a demonstration of how he saw hedge plashing in Hertfordshire. So this is a blackthorn hedge. It starts off, I've put some brown hair streaks on there as well. So they'd be rather fond of that. And so the first job is to pull out all of that old brash and all of that, that dense material, which you're then left with what that hedge looks like on the right, where it's individual stems. So you can see easily what you need to lay. That's then the plash at the bottom of that image as well. A very kind of, yeah, a good example of what that should look like. And then down at the bottom, in the bottom left, that's kind of how you lay it. So down, down, and down, folding them in with each other, and then putting the stakes and binders in as well. On the right is then what you're left with afterwards. You're left with a really neat, very, very dense hedge that is, going to be really good for keeping livestock in, but also for wildlife to kind of move in throughout. So yeah, so this is a really good example actually of what the process of hedge laying is really. So why do we do that? I mean, especially in this modern day and age where we don't need it to keep livestock in, we have fences now. We don't need it. So why do we manage it? The main reasons are it encourages more growth, so it keeps the hedge alive, basically. So it keeps it going. As I said before, you can keep hedges going, not necessarily forever, but for a long time. It also keeps it dense, so it means that they stay strong. But the reason is mainly, I mean, that's the reason really, is you want to keep it dense for wildlife. That's what it wants. It's also to stop it succeeding as well. So everything on land is trying to become a woodland effectively. And if we, left a hedgerow and didn't do anything, that's eventually what it would become. Stems would eventually die and fall over, and you'd end up with the main strong ones. It would grow up above the rest, and it would just become a line of trees, which is what you sometimes see, or quite often see now. So we need to manage it to kind of keep that succession in check, to kind of pause it in time, really. And it keeps it really dense and good for wildlife. So building nests. It also means that you're increasing the amount of sunlight that gets to it as well. So you're going to increase the amount of berries and the amount of flowers that you have for berry eaters and for pollinators as well. So there's loads of reasons why we still do it. Laid hedges are also lower and more open at the base as well, which allows sunlight to reach the sheltered south-facing edges of it as well. So that's especially pertinent for things like butterflies. It creates really nice microclimates as well. So it means that they stay warmer effectively. So they are yeah, a lot better for biodiversity generally. So yeah, laying hedges is really fantastic for it, which is hence why I do a lot of it. Now you will more often see hedges managed in this way. So the flail was invented, I think, in the 60s, and is, yeah, by far and away the predominant way of managing hedges now, which is, effectively driving along and shearing it away with lots of spinny chains. That's actually how it works, and it just kind of spins so fast that it just batters the hedge, which is quite a violent way, and it opens up and breaks open a lot of the stems. Um, there's a great kind of hedge expert called Megan Gember who always makes the point, which is really interesting and a quite complicated way, that flailing is generally not a great, well, not the best way of managing a hedge, but A lot more hedges would have been grubbed up if we didn't have an efficient mechanical way of managing them. They would have just been got rid of. So to some extent, the flail is, it's up to people to argue about and discuss. But the flail also probably saved a lot of hedgerows because it meant that we could manage it efficiently. But now we need to reassess where that is and how we're managing hedgerows, whether this is the best way. There's plenty of reasons why we should be using it. So what are the principles of good management now? If we're going to use a flail, especially, the best thing to do is to lay it. But unfortunately, there's not enough hedge layers. It's quite expensive. It's quite time consuming. And unless something, changes, we're not going to see, well, I'm not saying never. I'd love to see, and I'd try very hard to make hedge laying a bigger thing. But yeah, it's not a predominant form of managing hedges yet. So how do we manage hedges with a flail? Well, incremental cutting is the main way, so not cutting to the same point each year. This diagram down here is from the People's Trust for Endangered Species, and they've got loads of really good resources on hedge management. And so the black line is effectively kind of where you start off from. So 1 year you'll cut down to the black line, and the next year you'll cut down to that middle black line as well. And so you'll be leaving a little bit. You're not cutting down to the same point. So you're maintaining second year growth, which is the main thing, because hedges will only they'll only fruit and flower on second year growth. So they won't fruit and flower on the growth from that year. So they need that stock. They need to keep growing up and up and up and up in order to produce that benefit for biodiversity. So by letting it, you're still managing it, you're still kind of tickling it around the edges and still keeping it, trim and dense, but you're not allowing it, you're not cutting that to the same point each year, which is important. And it's the main way to keep them healthy. So you also want to leave a margin around the base as well. I'll talk more about this in a second. So, you'll remember I said at the beginning, it's at 2 meters from the inside of the hedge outside. So that's what you have to think about managing that as well. So leaving that green margin, preferably bigger than that as well, and diversifying it as well with different species of wildflower as well would be great. Whether you seed that or whether you allow them to grow up in different ways. So yeah, so also not cutting the autumn. This is to both make sure you're not just, shearing berries off of the hedge for birds to eat and ivy and things for that's producing pollen for late season pollinators. Legally, you can't cut hedges from March the 30th until I think 1st of September. I think it's 1st of September, but during that period. But it's better to leave another month, if not more, on both ends to kind of make sure that you're one at the beginning of the season. There's a lot of still early nesting birds that will still nest in hedges at that time, even in mid-March, early March sometimes, depending on how warm our weather is getting in the winter now. But then yeah, also take into account the things that need the berries and pollen in the autumn. Letting trees grow in the hedge line, and then of course rejuvenating when needed. So with this incremental cutting, you do reach a certain point where you need to either coppice, so that's cut to the base and allowed to regrowth, or preferably to lay the hedge. So yeah, so these are the kind of ideas of what we look for good management. And this is what happens if you don't manage a hedge in a good way. You end up, so at the bottom, that one is, you can see what the flail does. It's cracked and brittle. There's kind of these wounds in the hedge that's allowing infection to get in, and eventually over time it will stress the stems out so much that they will die, which is what we've got in that top picture, where those stems have died in between. And then the surviving ones have grown out and grown denser to utilize that space and to fill it out. But it's never going to be as dense as if you have multiple stems. So it just means it's going to be a lot more open to the elements. It's not going to be producing, delivering for biodiversity as it could be. And you'll eventually end up with the image in the bottom right, where eventually it will just kind of fade. Yeah, which is a shame and happens to a lot of hedgerows. So butterflies specifically, butterflies respond more to structure and management than just the hedge alone. So a lot of the time they won't, even if there's a hedge there, if it's managed poorly, butterflies aren't going to touch it. Especially things like brown hairstreak that will lay their eggs on it. So as soon as you flail that new growth away, you're flailing away the eggs of the brown hairstreak as well. So maintaining that second year growth is really, really important. and maintaining structural integrity to provide shelter as well. So yeah, so you need to make sure that it's dense and strong and solid and contiguous as well. So things like bats will not even will turn back once they reach a gap in a hedge. So even if there's a field gate, so making sure that that hedge is consistent is really important. And as Malcolm's kind of alluded to at the beginning, 64% of a butterfly species can be found at hedgerows. They're really, really important for so many species in so many different ways. So they're the best way to connect up protected core sites and to allow butterflies and other invertebrates and other species generally to move across the landscape. And I'll talk a little bit about what I'm talking about with those core sites at the later on as well. So a little bit more about margins. So yeah, margins are really important. Much of the benefit for hedgerows pollinators comes from the understory plants. So rather than actually the plants themselves. Um, Having a wide margin means you're also protecting roots from compaction, especially in kind of an arable context. So for example, in that picture on the right, that's going up right to the hedge boundary. That's going to be, you're going to be driving over the roots with a tractor. You're going to be stressing the hedge out. You're going to be, compacting the soil, so you're not going to have as much soil biodiversity either. And it just creates a generally better edge effect. So if you remember what I said at the beginning about, hedges off woodland edges, you're replicating that habitat better by having a margin as well. You're having that kind of, it's almost like a woodland glade where you find grass within a woodland. That's what you're getting with a hedgerow. And the more diverse the margin, the better it's going to be for wildlife. So for butterflies especially as well. So you want long grass for species that lay their eggs on or feed, for caterpillars that feed on long grasses. So things like the gatekeeper and small heath. So a lot of the kind of brown butterflies will like the kind of the hedgerow margin. So that's really important. And things like speckled wood as well. Um, Nettles for peacock butterfly as well. You often find nettles along a hedgerow. Garlic mustard for the orange tip, which is also called hedge mustard, which gives you an idea about what kind of habitats they like. And yeah, so it also it creates a corridor of understory pollen throughout the year. So if you only have two hedge, hawthorn or blackthorn, which is predominantly hedgerow will be, or maybe hazel, you'll only have pollen at the beginning of the year. But by having those understory plants, you're going to have consistent pollen resources throughout the whole year. Things flower at different times. So by having all those different species, you're maintaining that pollen resource for longer. So yeah, so these are a few examples of things you find. Things like cowslips, things like ground ivy are really great. Dog's mercury as well. You especially find them in ancient hedgerows. And a lot of the time where you find dog's mercury in a hedgerow, they're an ancient woodland indicator plant. So that is an indicator that that hedge was once part of a woodland. And also things like violet as well. So all kinds. Yeah, these are some pictures of some nice margins, especially things with knapweed, which are really nice. Butterflies love that. Yeah, so allowing them to get big and bushy, and have that nice buffer zone between cropland, or meadow and the hedge itself. So yeah, I won't go too much into this, but just a little overview of the fact that hedges are protected. A lot of it thanks to CPRE. So we've been campaigning for hedgerows since kind of almost the inception of the organisation. It's always been a big part, and we were behind a lot of this, the kind of legislation and campaigning against their destruction. So in 1997, we finally had kind of the hedgerow regulations, which said that it's illegal to remove hedgerows without permission, without doing an EIA, which is an environmental impact assessment to look at what the damage of removing the hedgerow would be. They're also now included in the national planning policy framework as well. So local plans are, need to think about local wildlife habitats and wider ecological networks. And it's the wider ecological network that's the kind of key in that, because that is what hedgerows are. Hedgerows are part of a network. They are connecting up all those different nodes across the landscape, all those protected landscape or their protected sites. They are corridors between them. So that's really important. We previously hedges were also protected in the fact that if you were claiming your agricultural subsidies when we were in the EU, under the CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy, in order to get those subsidies, you had to do certain things called cross compliance. One of those things was that you couldn't spray near a hedgerow, and you had to maintain a green margin around that hedgerow as well. When we lost that, there was a big fear that this really this brilliant encouragement for farmers to look after hedgerows would go. But luckily, that was signed into law in the Management of Hedgerows Regulations 2024. So that said, yeah, you cannot apply fertilizer or pesticide within 2 meters of the centre, and you must take reasonable steps to maintain green cover in that strip as well. So to maintain a margin, which is really nice. So I've spoken a little bit about connectivity, about corridors. So what does that mean? So in that diagram, it kind of perfectly shows the kind of history of our landscape over time. So before humans, there would have been this fairly pristine habitat across the whole country, different habitats, but nature would have been and species would have been able to move between easily and be able to kind of maintain connection between the populations. We kind of started colonizing the landscape, so we perforate that habitat, eventually dissect it and split it in half, dissipate it by kind of spreading it further, and our settlements spread further and further and further. And then eventually, over time, once these islands had formed, we then started shrinking these islands as we claimed more land. And then now we're in the kind of attrition phase where we have these habitats which are protected, but despite being protected, they are still declining in their in their quality. So looking after those core protected areas that are remnants of that original habitat is really important. So yeah, species can't move around the landscape easily anymore, and that's the main thing to kind of bear in mind. So what we want to think about with hedgerows is they are a corridor. So cores are our protected areas, and the corridor is a hedgerow. It can be other things. It can be things like a river as well. Rivers are great corridors. But yeah, so this is all kind of comes under the umbrella of the Lawson report, which was a brilliant report in 2010 by DEFRA, which basically the summary for that, and it underpins a lot of conservation nowadays, is we need bigger protected sites, we need better protected sites, but more importantly, with hedgerows especially, we need more joined up sites. So we need to make sure that species can maintain gene flow across the landscape, so they can keep their populations healthier over time. So this is a great diagram here as well, which shows you kind of what that looks like. So we want those core areas of habitat, the linear corridor, landscape corridors as well, which are going to be a bit bigger and a bit wider, stepping stones, so small habitats, and yeah, buffer zones between. So this is what we want an ecological network to look like in the English countryside. Yeah, so it combats habitat fragmentation, maintains those meta populations. So a meta population is effectively a population of populations. So it's all those populations that are disparate and individual within one. So yeah, that's I guess the kind of the ecological theory around hedgerows. And a species that kind of really encapsulates this is the white-letter hairstreak. So you can see in the kind of distribution map here, which is really interesting, is these are very disparate populations. They are kind of spread across the landscape and spread across the kind of the area, but they're not contiguous and they're not necessarily connected. And that's probably because they've lost their food plant, which is elm, because of elm Dutch elm disease. So we need to kind of specifically target these corridors for what are we allowing to move? What are we facilitating to move across these corridors? What plants are we planting? What are we putting in that will allow different species to move through? So we need to take them into account. This project especially is focusing on the white-letter hairstreak. So we are specifically planting disease-resistant elm in our hedgerows to connect up these populations so it allows them to spread better. They're also a great hedgerow species. So if you look at the kind of adult food plants, these are, all pretty classic hedgerow species: bramble, creeping thistle, wild privet. Wild privet as well. We're planting in our hedgerows too. So we're hoping that we're going to be helping the brown hairstreaks of Herts and Middlesex with our work here. So yeah, so this is a little bit, these next few slides, I'm going through a bit of our hedgerows, kind of a year in a hedgerow. So what their ecology looks like throughout the year and how that changes and how different species use them, especially butterflies. So in spring, blackthorn and hawthorn offer some really, really important early season nectar resources for things that are emerging first. So a lot of bees will use them initially, and queen bees that are looking to start a nest will or a hive, sorry, will kind of rely on that. And it's a really nice fact as well that even dormice will emerge from their winter hibernation, and they will specifically seek out blackthorn buds to eat, and they will eat buds and the flowers of blackthorn. So they're a really important early season source for a lot of species, but also things that emerge early like brimstone and orange tip butterflies as well. Again, I mentioned with the understory flowers as well, which increase diversity of pollen sources and sometimes are more important than the hedge, the woody plants in the hedge itself. Um, and I mentioned with the incremental cutting that it cuts off that second year growth. And this is really exemplified by the fact that when you cut every year, you reduce flower numbers by 75%. But when you cut once every 3 years and you reduce the amount you're cutting and you're incrementally cutting and allowing that growth and allowing that hedge to expand and grow bigger, that hedge produces 2 times more flowers over a 5 year period. So it's really important, and you're really kind of hobbling your hedge by not allowing it to kind of be its best hedgy self. Yep. So a little bit about kind of this is something that happens in the spring. So integrated pest management is a kind of human benefit for hedgerows. So they act as reservoirs for our natural enemies of crop plants. So these are natural enemies of pests and sometimes diseases as well that will affect our kind of arable crops. So things like caramid beetles will prey on a lot of those kind of pests, parasitic wasps as well, and ladybirds that prey on aphids, and they will all kind of that hedge will act as a source population, so it will allow them to then spread out into the field and take a lot of the kind of pressure off of using an insecticide. So in fact, increasing hedge cover from 1% to 3% led to a halving of insects on some farms of insecticide. So this is brilliant. By having those hedgerows, you're looking after your fields, you're incorporating them into the farming system, and it's an encouragement as well to then use less insecticide. When you're using less insecticide, you're allowing these natural enemies populations to grow even bigger, and therefore do a better job of clearing up your fields. And so yeah, so less insecticides for the beetles also means less for butterflies, which can only be a good thing. So later on in the season, so this is early in the season. This is one of the first butterflies to kind of emerge, and the first ones you'll see, which is the orange tip. And as I mentioned at the beginning, so garlic mustard, but also cauliflower, but we're kind of mainly focused on garlic mustard because it's a very common hedgerow species and they're main larval food plants. So you'll always find these in kind of hedgerows. They're really a really kind of ubiquitous part. And so yeah, orange tips are really kind of one of those emblematic species of the spring hedgerow. So adults will start emerging early in the middle of April, and then they'll peak in the second week of May as well. So they're quite an early butterfly. And looking in that kind of range picture as well, they are quite evenly spread. So there are a lot of them. So they like the area. And one thing I really like them, and these are actually my favorite butterflies. So orange tips are, well, one of my favorites, but probably up there. The reason I love them so much is because of the beautiful underside of their wings, which to me kind of mimics the dappled green of cow parsley, which is also one of the early things to flower in April and May. So when you look up through a cow parsley, and this one is I think that is cow parsley that it's resting on, it will look like the dappled light through that. So I think it's really beautiful. And in fact, there's a fun fact that I like about them as well is that you don't actually find any green British butterflies. This is just an effect. So if you zoom in, you can see that it's actually just scales of black and yellow that looks like green. So I think it's really fascinating. They're really, really cool butterflies. Moving on to summer, so kind of midway through, they're really, really important. This is when the kind of hedgerow trees shine really for a lot of species. So they'll use them for lekking, so forming those kind of mating I guess, rituals and mating dynamics where the kind of males will display and will kind of have their area in a tree, but they'll also kind of use them to bask as well, so get up nice and high and to kind of warm up in the mornings. And you see that with brown hairstreak and ash. Unfortunately, now a lot of mature ash trees in hedges have died because of ash dieback. Luckily, not as many as we feared, but still some. But you also then white-letter hairstreak as well in elm. So yeah, so we've lost a lot of our hedgerow trees because of disease. Um, so it's important to kind of keep maintaining them and managing them well for a lot of species. You'll also find in summer as well, birds will use them as singing points as well. So they'll kind of they'll find I think it's corn bunting. I think it's some or yellowhammer. I can't remember. I can't remember the bird species, but there are a lot of bird species that will specifically go to the highest point they can find within an area, and oftentimes that is a hedgerow tree because they grow quite high, and then they will kind of sing their hearts out at the top, and to attract kind of mates and to display as well. So yeah, so hedgerow trees are really important. Um, in terms of kind of hedge in summer for livestock, this is when they really shine. So tree hay is becoming quite popular, and a lot of people are doing that mainly because it's still green in hot summers. So if you look around, especially in the hot summer we had in last year, you know the field would be brown and dried up, and the grass would be dying, but the hedge itself would still be really strong because of those deep roots. So they're really still getting water even when it looks like the rest of the landscape is completely dry. So it means you're always going to have fodder for your livestock when you have hedgerows. And because of those deep roots, they're also mining trace minerals that aren't found near the surface. So you find a lot of minerals that the cattle wouldn't otherwise get from the grass because the roots just aren't deep enough to access them. In fact, hedge-rich farmland have healthier cows generally, and that's been scientifically proven. And that's because of things like anthelmintics, which are natural wormers. So a lot of species will have natural wormers. I think it's things like I think cowpass is one, but there's lots of other species that are act as natural anthelmintics, and even things like um, having willow, and willow is where you get salicylic acid, which is the base ingredient of aspirin. So cows will medicate by consuming willow to kind of relieve them when they have headaches. And they're natural browsers too. So this is their natural way of being. They're, an auroch would be as a woodland, and I've, put that at the bottom. Aurochs are, beasts of the woodland edge. That's what they like. They would have lived, and bison, where you still get them, in Białowieża forest in Poland, which is an ancient woodland. They are uh, species of the glade. They live within between that kind of grassland, but also within the woodland. So this is a kind of part of their natural way of being. But yeah, big letters there, which is a this is a big benefit for a lot of farmers is they are shelter in hot summers. So they are so important. You drive around the landscape and you'll see cows lined up underneath the hedgerow to kind of escape the heat. And like species like the speckled wood, they will move between the sun and the shade to modulate their temperature over time. So they know how to do these things. They just need to be given the landscape and the habitat to do that. All these species are the same. They all have this innate knowledge of how to look after themselves, which I think is really amazing. So yeah, so they are also woodland edge animals, much like the speckled wood. And yeah, so a summer species as well, a kind of high summer species of butterfly that you find in the hedgerow is the gatekeeper. So these are lovely butterflies as well. I really like them, and these are really emblematic of the summer hedgerow. So this is what you'll find in a summer hedge. In fact, James Pettifer, who wrote the Papillonium Britanniae in 1717, described them as the hedge eye, and the other name for them is also hedge brown, which is I think still quite commonly used. But hedge eye is really nice. I really like that as a way because they do look like they have kind of two eye spots on their upper wings, which I think looks really nice. Yeah, but they're known as a butterfly of the wayside. They've always been known as that. They were called that in Papillonium Britanniae. They are known as that, and that's why they're called gatekeeper. They will be found at gates and in between those kind of wayside areas. So yeah, so they're really important, and it's they're a really good example of why those margins are so important and why it's important to leave them uncut and have long grass because they lay their eggs on grass, on long grass stems or things like cocksfoot. So, that's why thinking about how you manage your margins is also really important. When you're mowing them, at what times of year you're mowing them, and allowing, that habitat to grow up to benefit as many species as possible, really, especially ones like the gatekeeper. So autumn and winter. So this is when the hedge starts to kind of quieten down a little bit, but and slow down. But a lot of species, in terms of wildlife, it's definitely not quiet. A lot of things are really still using, and it's a really crucial time for them. So things like ivy blossom is really important for red admiral and comma before overwintering. So to kind of replenish their stocks and get that energy they need to overwinter. And a lot of other species will use that ivy blossom. You'll find it. I've had some. I'm big. I always let the ivy grow up in my garden, and it's amazing. In September, you hear that it sounds alive with bees and with so many species that are, it's the only thing that's flowering at that time. So it's really important. And you'll find a lot of ivy blossom in a hedge a lot of the time. Sometimes when the hedge is quite ill, which is unfortunate because if it's a sickly hedge, there's a lot of light, so the ivy blossom will grow out, the ivy will grow throughout it, which is sometimes a bad sign of a bad hedge, but silver linings, I guess. Things like migratory birds, such as fieldfare and redwing, will eat the berries. So yeah, so things like haws, rose hips, but also things like crab apples, they love them. So that's the time they'll be fruiting, and that's the time that those migratory birds arrive on our shores, and waiting for a nice bountiful feast from our hedgerows. And much like I mentioned with the flowers in spring, it's the same for fruits. So cutting every year, you're reducing your berry biomass by 83%. That's a massive amount. But when you change to cutting once every 3 years, you're producing 3.4 times more berries over 5 years than annual cutting. So it makes a huge difference. And a nice kind of a late season butterfly, and one that you see in late season hedges is the red admiral that peaked its population in September. So when that kind of ivy blossom is out and flowering, so they really need that, and they really rely on that for if they're hibernating or if they're migrating. So it's why it's better to leave that hedge longer than the legal period to allow them to properly utilize that resource, that you have. And then kind of finally, this is a little bit, I guess, generally about hedgerows, and how important they are is carbon storage. You may have heard this, but they're a massive carbon store, both above and below ground. So about half of the hedge's biomass is below ground. In fact, so as much as you're locking up a lot of carbon in their stems and in their vegetation up above ground, there's as much below ground as well. There's thick roots. But as well, and this doesn't even think about it, this doesn't even kind of take that into account, is that when you have these areas that are uncultivated and uncropped and left, they form like a woodland soil, which is so rich in organic material that slowly transfers through the soil column. There'll be so many species of invertebrate that live within that are formed of carbon themselves. So they are this massive carbon sink. And in fact, as much as 5% of farmland carbon storage can be attributed to hedgerows. So think of how much more could be done if we planted more hedgerows and managed our hedgerows better. More importantly, in fact, 1 hectare of hedgerows, between 3.5 to 6 meters wide, so a little bit wider than you'd probably find on average, could store 131.5 tons of carbon a year. So yeah, so they play a big role, and could play an even bigger role if we allow them to. This is kind of an interesting one. I've left it here probably to just sort of glaze over a little bit, but I keep this in because it talks about how important hedges have been for us throughout our history. So we're looking ahead now to how important they can be in terms of carbon and in terms of wildlife, but we've really relied on them for a lot of it for fuel. And in fact, it's been written into law, so it's been mentioned in farm leases in Kings Walden in Hertfordshire, and they are an enterprise between humans, non-humans, and our environmental context. So they are this interface between us and nature, which is why I love them so much and why they're so fascinating. So it's for all the reason we've mentioned, but also identity and about looking forward about what our relationship with nature can be like in the future. And this is a nice poem from William Wordsworth that I think kind of exemplifies that. About it's about a very nasty gentleman that stops this woman. He's called Harry Gill. He stops someone called Goody Blake from collecting firewood from a hedge, and she curses him, so he's cold for the rest of his life, which is very bleak. But yeah, it's a nice poem. So this line: "So now, when the frost was past enduring, and made her poor old bones to ache, could anything be more alluring than an old hedge to Goody Blake?" Much the way that I feel about hedges. So where next? Where are we going? So what's the future look like? So policy wise, we've got loads of different things that are happening. So sustainable farming incentive is the new kind of agricultural subsidy that we're getting. So it's encouraging, paying farmers to do things for nature. Some of those are hedgerows, but and I'll talk about it now. Is hedgerow heroes. This is what we're doing. So this is what CPRE is involved in to actively put hedgerows back in the landscape and to get them managed better as well. So we want to plant 2 kilometers of new hedges by March, and these are really species rich. But we're also doing all sorts. So I'm also running an event with Malcolm as well and FWAG, the Farming Wildlife Advisory Group, to talk to farmers and land managers about how to manage hedgerows. So we kind of disseminate this information up to them to try and get that best practice into the industry. But if you want to join us planting, so we hold loads of planting days. We'll be holding them up until the end of March when the season ends. But if you want to get in touch, please, yeah, let me know and get in touch with either Malcolm or myself. We always want more volunteers, so yeah, anyone's more than welcome to join. So yeah, so this is some nice scenes of happy hedge planters, which has been really good fun, and I've really loved working with people, and it's and it's a really, I'm very lucky to what I do, so it's really nice. And this is a list of all the species that we're planting as well, so you'll see it's a good diversity to kind of try and target a lot of those butterfly species that have very specific food plants. Yeah, to try and kind of mean we're kind of helping as many species as we possibly can, really. We also want to change farming systems. So I do a lot of kind of involved with lots of groups like Emerging Generation, which is a group of kind of young people working in farming and regenerative farming and food. And so we're trying to campaign to get farming to change in a lot of ways. So mob grazing is a new technique, which is where you basically graze a very small area with cattle for a day, and you move them constantly. So moving them every day, and it builds up soil carbon loads because you're completely depleting an area and then moving on and allowing it to recover before you go back. You're not just grazing a large area, and this needs smaller fields to do this and to do this practice. So to me, that's a perfect reason to get hedges involved and to start hedging up some of those larger fields to facilitate that. So yeah, different ways of grazing. There's also things like agroforestry and alley cropping. So a lot of farmers are trying to incorporate trees more into their farming systems because of the kind of connections they make with their roots and with the roots of the crop through mycorrhizal fungi, but also they build up soil carbon as well, like we were talking about. So a lot of farmers want to kind of plant hedges or fruits or fruit trees in between their kind of their cropping area. So they'll have an area that's almost the length of a header of a combine, and you'll go up once, and then it will be a hedgerow, and then there'll be another alley of crop, and then another, and then on and on and on. And it also means you're getting that IPM approach. So you're having more hedgerows, you know, adjacent to the crop. So you're going to have more of that integrated pest management. You're going to have more of that those natural enemies going out into the crop and cleaning it for you. And mainly, I mean, this is the main thing I kind of as a takeaway and what we're trying to change within farming and within kind of the countryside is this obsession with tidiness and trying to constantly tidy up things. So Oliver Rackham, who was a great landscape historian, held particular eye for destroying of ivy tods and misshapen trees, cutting hedges to the ground each year. He wrote this in the 80s, but it's the same as it is now. It's just this trying to tidy up and make things look good. We don't want to tidy up. We want to add as much as we can and put more into the environment and plant more. Nature likes messiness. They like that kind of untidiness and that diversity. So yeah, we need to kind of add more rather than taking away. Um, CPRE is a big campaign to get a 40% increase by 2050, of which Hedgerow Heroes is contributing to. And we found that, for every £1 invested, there would be a £3.92 return in hedgerows. So it's money well spent as I see it. But it does see a shift to how we see them as a resource, not just a feature in the landscape. Um, yeah, so this is my kind of final slide. This is actually the poem that opened um my dissertation by John Clare, one of my favorite poets. And it's just really nice, and it kind of, yeah, it's a very positive view of hedges. A little lane the brook runs close beside, and spangles in the sunshine while the fish glide swiftly by, and hedges leafing with the green spring tide. From out their greenery the old birds fly, and chirp and whistle in the morning sun. So thank you very much for coming to my presentation, and thank you listening to me wax lyrical about hedges and butterflies. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've learned something new. And yeah, I'd love to hear some questions. I think some people have been leaving them in the chat. So yeah, so thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, James. That's really great. If you want to take the slides down, we'll see if we can get people to appear in face to face. But while just doing that, I'll just go through some of the questions in the chat. And Brian, who's in North America, has told us that all the Satyrium hairstreaks have virtually disappeared from Massachusetts in the last 5 years, and he's hoping to get some insights from us as to how to avoid that. Well, I think that's a challenging one, Brian. I think generally the status of our hairstreaks are relatively stable. We've got four species of hairstreak in Hertfordshire. I suppose the one of most concerns is the white-letter hairstreak, and that its status is probably as much to do with the problems of the food plant, which still suffer from Dutch elm disease as anything else. But the huge success has been brown hairstreak, which did die out and is now making a stunning comeback and storming right across Middlesex and up into Hertfordshire and Essex. And I think a lot of that is down to hedgerow management 50 years ago being dreadful, and hedgerow management now in a lot of those areas is much better. I mean, largely because the hedge farming's been abandoned in a lot of the areas it's expanding into. So if you can get them to abandon farming or at least manage their hedges better, that might be a good start for species like that. But I don't. Have you got any other insights, James, into that? Manage your hedges better.
No, I mean it's I know that it's an interesting comparison, to be fair, Massachusetts, because it's probably one of the only places outside of the UK or northern France that has a kind of history of having hedgerows. New England had quite a lot. It's an interesting kind of ecology there because a lot of it was cleared. I'm sure you'll probably know this, Brian, but for people generally, a lot of it was cleared in colonization, and was covered in sheep and covered in farmland, and then later on slowly became and for those reasons that which is interesting comparison that Malcolm makes as well, because it was then grown up by all secondary woodland, and there was this explosion of woodland and this abandonment of farming. So yeah, it's surprising because it's a rewilded landscape in a lot of ways. And it's bizarre when you're in this woodland that feels very ancient, but in fact it's only about 200 years old because it was all kind of recolonized quite recently. So I don't really know. I assume it's probably something about the management of hedges, because yeah,
Well,
it is.
it could well be pesticide related, I guess. But
Yeah, probably that as well. I think I think the
Well, of
states
all,
run out neonics, but I don't know.
right. Well, of all the butterflies we have in Massachusetts, I've had 71 species of butterflies in my yard, by the way.
Mm,
Of all the butterflies we have in Massachusetts, the Satyrium hairstreaks have been absolutely cut off at the knees. There
mm,
are other species that are doing fine. Some are even increasing, but all the Satyrium hairstreaks, every one of them, some of them were extremely common butterflies. Can't find one. at all. So,
Oh, how
so I
recently
know
has
it's a
that been done?
combination of factors. But by
Mm.
the way, I very much enjoyed your talk,
Thank
and I
you.
like the fact that you added poetry at the end because I write poetry, so
Oh, nice.
I like that a lot.
Brilliant. Great. Thanks a lot for that. Nick Bowles has asked a question, James, which is right up your street. Where are you sourcing disease-resistant elm from?
Oh, this was actually you, Malcolm. I think you sent me the link for it. It was unfortunately there's a few suppliers. I can't remember the name.
Wasn't it Matthews who went,
I
you went
think that
for?
was Frank P. Matthews. Yeah, that one was Frank P. Matthews, the ones we got them from in the end. And which is a big
I think
supplier.
that they often seem to be favoured because they are actually growing it in the UK. Quite a lot of organisations we deal with and tell to plant disease-resistant elm say, "Oh, we only plant native stuff,"
Mm.
but because Matthews are actually growing it in the UK, they managed to persuade themselves that it is a native grown elm, even though it's probably still a nation strain that's been brought in.
I mean that's the thing, and it's why it's all this stuff is a lot more complicated because it's funny enough like Brexit really affected our importing of diseases and elms because a lot of them I think come from Italy, I think it is, or somewhere else. I think it's Italy and Germany produce a lot of them. So we can't really import them as much anymore
No.
because of Brexit.
I think
Keep
there's
some of it in the UK.
there's a link in the Nick on the disease resistant elm website to Matthews. I think on
Yeah.
one of the nurseries they mentioned, but it's somewhere in like Worcestershire or somewhere over in the far west.
But
But
they
several people we've dealt with have sourced them from there. I mean, they are difficult to source. You have to order quite well in advance, I think.
mm,
They're often not available when the time you want to plant them. You have to order them some months in advance.
they go out of stock very quickly. Yeah.
Yeah. Will hedge laying with oh managed to lose the question. Yeah, it's not very clever.
Oh, it's nice to hear we've got hedge layers. I think it just says we'll be hedge laying with council volunteers on Friday from Chris.
Yes.
Nice. I think more of a statement than a
Council, yes.
question. But yeah, but that's it's nice to hear. It's really good to hear. Yeah, it's
Chris
very
says,
cool.
well, did you want to just say when your next hedge tasks are, James? Because I think there's one on Sunday, isn't there?
There is.
If you just say quickly where you've been planting and
Yeah,
when other thing, and I think your email address is on the stuff we've been sending out to members.
should be. Yeah.
But if anyone can't find it to register, then happy if you send it to me instead. But just describe what else is coming up.
So it's we have planting on the 22nd of sorry, the 15th on this Sunday, the 22nd as well, which is the following Sunday. And then I think that's all we've got at the moment for February, but I'll be releasing some March dates as well soon. So we'll have more, probably hopefully five or six before the season ends. And yeah, they're all located generally East Hertfordshire. Next year, I'd like to get some more kind of down towards South Hertfordshire and around St Albans and Middlesex. But yeah, they're all Woodhall Estate, which is near Watton at Stone, which is sort of only about 50 minutes away from where, and about half an hour, maybe probably less actually, 25 minutes from Hertford. So yeah, so it's a really nice. I mean, they're doing loads of work for wildlife. So there's quite a lot, and I think Liz Goodyear from BC has been involved in some of their work they've done on
Yeah,
butterflies
they
there.
do a lot of good work for grizzled skippers because they've got some
Yeah.
on their land. Actually, one thing I was going to mention, you said at one point, James, that having lots of wildflower margins alongside hedges was a jolly good thing, and I think from the wildflower meadows that we've been encouraging always seem to do really well in butterfly terms when they are alongside hedges and woods. But what I was going to say is that the branch has invested heavily in wildflower seeds this winter, and we've purchased a lot that have been used mostly by partners that we work with to do planting in sowing along in good locations where we're creating wildflower meadows. But we do have a certain amount left over, which we're offering free to branch members.
Okay.
I put a notice up on the branch website a couple of days ago. So if you look on that, it tells you what the species mix is, and they're all selected as seeds for plants, which are particularly good for butterflies and moths. There's a mixture of about 25 of them all together, and they're good for sowing in neutral soil. So if anyone would like any of those, then do drop me a line. We've got a limited quantity, so you probably won't get tons and tons of them. But yeah, we have got a reasonable amount to give out, and we're posting them out for free. So if you know somewhere where you'd like to, if you've got a hedge in your garden or a wood at the edge of your park that you think would be a good place to put some seeds in, then do get in touch, and I can send you some through the post. And they are, as I say, they are particularly selected as being a dream mix for butterflies and moths, as are the hedge plants, which James has been planting this winter as well. So let's just see, have we got any other questions on here? Jed has said, are the native sourced seeds? Jed, yes. So all the seeds we sow are native sourced, and the particular mix we've got is from Lincolnshire that we're using this year, but we tend to use ones from as local as possible. And I think the same is true of all the hedge plants. The only exception we make are well considered. So things like disease-resistant elm we plant because it is essentially the same species as the elms that used to grow in this country. It's resistant to the Dutch elm disease, so it doesn't succumb to the Dutch elm disease. It's difficult to purchase English elm at present because they are still subject to controls because of the disease. And even if we did plant English elms, they would not manage to survive for more than 20 or 30 years before they in turn succumbed. And although the butterflies have been existing for 50 years now on suckers that regrowth, I suspect there's going to be a law of diminishing returns at some stage. And I'm pretty keen that we get some stronger genetic stock involved. The particular problem with elms is that all the elms that used to grow in the English countryside were all clones. So they didn't seed. They were effectively all cuttings. So the amount of genetic diversity in them was extremely low, which is probably why they have died out so comprehensively. Yeah, getting some different genetic strains in that are from countries where the disease has been prevalent for a lot longer is a good thing. But that's a relatively unusual for us to have an introduced plant like that. Right. So Corinne has said, what's the best hedge plant to use in a garden instead of fencing? Well, you can do that one, James.
Yeah. I'd say, and this is an interesting tactic that I want to try. I might try with some hedges next year. Is I would probably recommend if you're planting a garden hedge, I assume you want something quickly, you want something that grows quickly and grows densely, which is I'd say hawthorn. Hawthorn is probably the best thing, and they're good for kind of protective gardening as well because they're very thorny. And also, I was talking to Malcolm before this as well, and we were talking about how they are one of the best for a lot of species. So they cover a lot of species, especially for the pollen as well. They really like them. So what I would probably do is plant a hawthorn hedge, and then rather than just leave it at that, because they grow up quite densely, so you get a nice big hedge, is I then plant stuff, especially shade tolerant things, in it in the second year or the first year or the second year. So things like dog rose. So planting dog rose that will grow as a climber and grow up throughout the hedge. Things like spindle is also really nice, and do fairly well in the shade. So I'd recommend kind of planting a low density hedge first. You get that initial growth, and then planting things within that that then means it's more diverse and you're targeting more species. But if you're going to go with anything, that kind of balance between amenity and between kind of wildlife, hawthorn is really good. So I'd go for the hawthorn hedge. And then plant stuff within it and diversify it with dog rows as well. So hawthorn and dog rows is a nice combo.
Great. Well, I don't think there's any more questions in the chat. If anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask a real life question, then you should be able to. I think I've allowed unmuting to take place, and you can probably turn your camera on as well if you want. But I think we've got a few people on camera. Stuart says thanks very much for a very interesting talk. Any more for any more? That looks like you're getting away lightly.
I think so.
So I've been identifying the butterflies as we went along. I'll send you some IDs in a minute.
Have my feedback at the end.
Great. Okay. Well, look, thanks ever so much for everyone tuning in. It's really great to see so many of you. We'll be making the recording available on our YouTube channel within the next couple of days. And we've also got all recordings of previous talks on there. We've had Ian Small's talk last month on butterflies from South America was just stunning, just amazing photographs there. And that's really recommend to look at that. We've also got Dave Goulson's talk, which I think was our best attended one ever, which is available. That's on the Surrey branch website, so you have to go on to the recordings page of our branch website probably to find that. But that was a really excellent talk we had in December as well. So if you missed that one, I think we had over 250 people, which is probably the record. So yeah, lots of other people saying thanks, interesting, thanks.
Variations thereof. Thank you, everyone.
So I just wonder if you want to say another poem before we all go.
Oh, not off the top of my head. I haven't revised. I'll do my next one on butterflies and poems.
Oh, there's a question. Jed said, "What was the fourth Hairstreak?" Well, which was the ones I think purple Hairstreak probably was the one I didn't mention.
Oh yeah,
Jed, which is our most common Hairstreak by far, quite possibly our most common butterfly. But as it spends all its time sitting on tops of trees, it's reported far less often than seen. But that does very well in oak woods. You don't really see it so much in farmlands and hedgerows. I suspect the White-letter Hairstreak has a bit of a double whammy because it is in farmland and hedgerows, which are the most vulnerable to pesticides. But yeah, as with all these, Jed said no, it's not black. It was just saying, is it purple, brown, white letter, and black? No, we don't have black in this in Herts and Middlesex. Though it is in Buckinghamshire, not far away. It's green. Green is the other one. Green Hairstreak, which is actually probably now our rarest Hairstreak, certainly in Hertfordshire. But it does rather better in Middlesex. So yeah, we've just got the 4. Other people have got 5. Won't ask Brian how many he's got.
Uh-oh.
But you used to.
I think I have 11 in my yard.
Oh. Well, I think they are difficult to spot. I was wondering, maybe your eyesight's getting worse.
That's what Jeffrey Glassberg, the president of NAP, he said I need a new prescription.
Yes, well, I've
exactly the same thing.
Certainly had a crick neck from
very good
Hairstreak.
Yes, I know.
Jed is saying he saw a black Hairstreak in Wormwood Scrubs 3 years ago. Well, we know there are brown Hairstreaks in Wormwood Scrubs. I don't think we've had a report of black Hairstreak, but it's outside their established range, although we do know that there have been releases of black Hairstreaks, as of quite a lot of other butterfly species in and around London. So it is possible. If you have got a photograph, we'd be really interested to see it, Jed.
My very latest butterfly, the only butterfly added to my yard list last year, was red-banded hairstreak. When he has his wings folded, he's about as big as your little fingernail.
Wow, that's amazing.
Extremely small but interesting butterfly that has really come on strong. It's a southern butterfly that's just recently come into Massachusetts and now is colonizing the whole place.
Cool. Right. Okay. Well, thanks ever so much for tuning in. We'll hope to see you again on the 4th of March for our talk, which will be Andrew Woods talking
Thanks, James.
about the fortunes of butterflies in Herts and Middlesex last year. Great.
Cool.
All right. Take care. Thanks, James.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Malcolm. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.